And so we kind of have this healing trauma model that's, I've only listed here the parts that really overlap for yoga and Gabor Mate. There's a lot more I could share on both subjects, but these are the ones that really mesh in a way that I find are mutually supporting. So the first thing that you want is to create a sense of safety. And what that looks like is living in a stable way where you're able to regulate your own nervous system, where you have a support network of people that you trust, where you have a secure attachment to yourself and or other people. So that's a big piece of work right there. Just getting to a point where you feel safe. And you might not have a secure attachment to yourself. And that might be the first place to start is, and we'll get this later on in the presentation here, but the first step in yoga is tapas. That is the first stage where we begin to build some kind of daily practice that will start to regulate our nervous systems and will start to increase our own sense of secure attachment to ourselves and help us to get a little bit closer to our real, true authenticity. In all fairness, many of us don't even know who we are authentically are, especially if we grew up being, pleasing mom and dad, or maybe even caregiving for mom and dad in some cases, and then maybe getting married early and kind of stepping into the role of wife and stepping into the role of mother, or whatever your situation happened to be. Just taking that time to begin to get to know who you are and what you really want out of life can take years sometimes of practice. And so this practice doesn't have to be really big or major. In fact, one of the things that we encourage is just taking a small step, one thing that you can do for yourself every day to begin to build that secure attachment or that trust in your own self. Because your inner self, your inner child, your core, your wounded self, whatever you might want to call it, the part of you that is suppressed, the part of you that isn't allowed to feel its feelings or express itself, that part needs to learn to trust you. And like, for instance, I smoked from the time I was 12 years old until, I don't know, not long enough ago, honestly. I think I quit in 2017. So I smoked for a long period of my life, and I quit several times during that period of time, once for 3 years, and then started smoking again. But the thing was, I kept telling myself, I'm going to quit smoking. And then I'd start again. And there was always that little voice in my head that would say, I knew it. I knew you weren't going to do it. And that was every time I did that, I was losing that trust in myself. And when I finally quit for good, and this was, I have to be honest, a good year into my regular yoga practice. So here I was going to yoga and doing these breathing practices and then going to smoke a cigarette after class. So it did take me a while to get there. But when I finally got there, it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to pull up my bootstraps and I'm going to just try to make it work. And I know I'm not going to be able to make it. It was just, I'm not going to smoke today. And then I'm not going to smoke the next day. And just sticking with that one day at a time. I can do this for one more day. And also the yoga helped because especially the breathing practices, it and some of them can give you that same sense of just taking a deep breath and letting it out with a big exhale, like we did at the beginning of our time together. And that's really what you're getting with that hit of cigarette, besides all the toxic stuff that's in there too. So these are things I'm learning in my brain and also feeling in my body. And I'm just taking it one day at a time and I'm building that trust within myself slowly but surely. So that's that stabilizing yourself, regulating yourself, nervous system regulation, really noticing when you're in fight or flight and learning the exercises from both Dr. Mate's work and yoga and many other healing modalities that you might be interested in to learn how to come out of that sympathetic nervous system response and into the parasympathetic nervous response, where we can calm and restore and relax and heal. And then the next part is reprocessing trauma memories. And many of us, most of us, will benefit from therapy of some sort in this aspect, just to have either a yoga therapist, or a psychiatrist, or anywhere in between, whatever you think, really resonates with your authentic self. What kind of attachment style do you have? What triggers your fight or flight response? Can you develop the healthy tools to support yourself now that you're a grown up and you don't need to rely on a caregiver anymore? So that authentic self, or that attachment self, you may have learned at an early age that if you were going to cry, that your mom would just ignore you anyway. And so now, as a grown-up person, when you have a sore rib and you think maybe it's broken, you're like, yeah, well, probably I don't wanna bother the doctor anyway, and it's probably fine, because you're so conditioned to not ask for help. So that might be something you might notice in therapy. And I only mention that as an example because that's something that I took away from that, is that I was so conditioned to not ask for help, and it was viewed as a positive personality trait because Christine is so independent. And so I viewed that as, just solidifying my value of not having to ask for help. And then when I literally can't manage anymore and I finally do ask for help, it triggers all of this shame response around that. And that's very, very common, especially in women. And I don't want to stereotype anything, and I'm trying to be conscious about there are many different family styles and many different ways we can be caregivers in our lives, but many women especially carry this people pleasing, not wanting to ask for help part of their personality that everybody says is kind of a badge of honor. There's a story in Dr. Gabor Mate's book about a woman who had breast cancer, and she was married to a man whose previous wife had died from breast cancer. And when she was diagnosed, her first thought was not of her, but of how was her husband going to manage having to go through this again. It's just, that, like I said earlier, that kind of obsessive need to please other people and take care of other people before taking care of ourselves. But then once we get some therapy and we get some tools and we work with ourselves and we maybe find a support network like Breast Friends is for you all, or some other support group that might be helpful for you, you begin to kind of move on. You start to feel responsible for and connected to yourself. And again, like I said, you have to pace yourself. It's not a quick fix. If you think about it, if it took 40 years to get here, it might take that long and maybe even longer to get to a place where you never ever thought you'd be. But it's worth the journey. And then that self-compassion piece is super, super important, to have radical compassion for yourself, like you were your own grandchild or your own child or your favorite little puppy or whatever, some creature in your life for whom you would just do anything to make them happy and to see them smile and to know that something that you did made them feel good. And that's what we want here, is to befriend ourselves in such a way that we have that sort of attitude towards ourselves. And then recovery, oddly enough, the words recover, it's recovering yourself. That is what healing also means at its core is coming back together, rejoining. That's healing. That's wound healing, both mental and physical and emotional.